Alright everyone, based on the success of casting off anyone who's outside of the norm as either a Nazi or a Russian lately, the media is now moving, the fake news media is maneuvering itself into a position, you can see with the Washington Post's crazy ass report here, link in the description archived of course, to protect the establishment of the Mexican government from the possibility that it will be, that a reformist movement will take them out at some point and make life better for the people of Mexico. Now, of course, Mexico would benefit from a little bit more nationalism and perhaps a little bit more libertarianism, possibly combined with muzzling elements of its establishment that'll attack anybody who's outside of the globalist framework. Of course, Mexico has problems with cartel violence. It has problems with its own porous southern border. They do have a wall there, albeit a smaller, mostly fence one. It doesn't 100% work, I guess. Mainly because the Mexican government said, well, instead of dealing with the problem ourselves, we'll just put people on a train and ship them to the U.S. border, which is where they largely want to go anyway. And then Mexico, of course, actually contains some illegal immigrants, believe it or not, as well. Mexico also has a problem with having extreme draconian gun laws. To the point at which basically most of the population is completely disarmed. So you get a cartel that's armed, like a militant group. Yeah, they're going to be able to run roughshod over the local population. Nobody's going to fucking stand in their way. They know better than to get their kids tortured and their wife shot. They know better. They'll pay them their blood money, or at the very least, they'll stay out of their way, because that's what happens there. So the Mexican government is extremely vulnerable. You've got a Mexican government that can't toe-to-toe with Trump, making them look weak. That can't do anything about the cartels, making them look weak. That has repeatedly fucked around with its own population, much of which still lives in poverty outside of certain better-off urban zones. You've got the flight of Mexicans who have significant training in sciences, especially medicine, teaching. Those are big ones into the southern U.S. states, where they get ahead with the visa lottery system, and then abandon the communities there, leaving them on short supply as far as people who have significant training. That's not just a problem in Mexico, by the way. It's a problem in many other countries where someone ultimately, if they get a really, really good education, their first priority is, hey, I want to go to the U.S. Hey, can I come be a citizen there and make 10 times as much in my home country, and there are no cartels that'll be around me? Hell, I'll be living in a mansion that, in the home country, they'd have to be an outright millionaire to afford. In the U.S., they get, the lower end six-figure salary. They're doing just fine by the living standards that in many cases they're used to. You come from that marginal middle class of Mexico, come to the U.S., make 4 times as much money in the same position, even if you're paying more taxes. Basically everything else is still better off. So the Mexican establishment clearly is worried because any significant intelligent reform movement that can manage to get enough people together to defend it from getting, assassinated by cartel members, and that has the backing of, enough groups that they can withstand the constant smears they will get from the legacy media down there, from the machine establishment media. Any group that seeks to rip out some of the corruption and, actually do something about the cartels could easily take power in Mexico. Well, they're terrified of that, so what they're going to do is, if that ever happens, they're setting the groundwork so that people say, oh, the Russians got involved. So in other words, let me get this straight, because this seems to be what they're getting at. Any good reform movement that seeks to uplift the local population and stop it from being enslaved or abused is backed by Russia. I think we know why Russia in many countries is now more popular than the United States, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be the opposite. We should be the ones propping up reformist movements in other countries. We're the ones that should be, yes, we should attempt through diplomacy and through politics, we should be attempting to spread the Republican system of government. Absolutely. We should still be doing that. Lately, it seems like we're actually attempting to stop it from happening, both here and abroad. It seems like a lot of these movements that seek to reform, like you would think of maybe some of the movements in Europe right now. They're saying, hey, we want the EU to stop, regulating everything that goes on outside of a democratic fashion, because basically in their system, the population within the national borders elects MEPs, and then they go and they vote on things. Once those bureaucracies are set up, though, they do basically whatever they want, and they no longer need the permission of the actual people of those nation states. So in other words, they don't represent any actual population within Europe. And so it's anti-democratic. Meanwhile, you've got people who would like to say, oh, all of these smaller parties, both left and right, oddly enough, are controlled by Russia. There's no way that Russia has anywhere near the influence that people are granting to it. It's not possible. I'm sorry, but a bunch of shitposting accounts on Twitter don't mean much. Think of it this way. For years and years and years, the legacy media, the New York Times and the Washington Post said, well, basically, groups of people doing activism online don't really accomplish anything tangible in the world. They dismissed it as a sort of joke. Now, all of a sudden, in the wake of the 2016 election here, they want to convince you that a much smaller number of bot accounts run by one state are managing to usurp all of the Western nations' democratic systems. I'm sorry, I don't see that happening. Look, the grassroots force of a bunch of content creators, bloggers, vloggers, trolls, shitposters, and the off-bot, most of which probably have nothing to do with Russia, is what's causing the usurpation of politics as normal in many of these countries. In various directions. You've got nationalistic groups, you've got socialistic groups, you've got groups that are more libertarian, you've got uprising authoritarian movements, like a literal fascist movement or something. But those are grassroots. Look, it's not that Russia sends KGB agents over to antagonize and then buffs its own numbers up with bots online. That's not going to affect anybody's election. What it can do is change people's minds. But here's the thing. If a bunch of Russian bots are pushing, like, release the memo, how is that hurting the United States? I would say that transparency is a good thing. Look, if there's anything concerning in it, it should be released regardless of who's spreading a hashtag on Twitter. And by the way, why is it that we never see statistics in any of these cases? There's never a study performed saying how many minds were changed, only how many people may have seen some supposedly botted post. And that doesn't even take into consideration the organic, the grassroots spreading of a hashtag, or a video, or a post, a news story, whatever it may be, absent the botting. It could have gone viral anyway. You have no way of knowing because you're not in two timelines at once. See, it's preemptive propaganda. They're setting up this land of confusion, helter-skelter bullshit to try to explain as this paradigm continues to shift for the next few years, as more and more establishment movements get plowed under by newcomers that have good new ideas, some of which will work, some of which will be shit, honestly. As that happens, they're seeking to exonerate themselves of the blame for running their countries into the ground and basically committing treason against all of us by saying, oh no, it's not, we did nothing wrong, it was those evil Russians again. Because it makes sense to do that because of the Cold War mentality, where, and oddly enough, it would make more sense, it'd be more believable if they said the Chinese were doing it. But the Chinese are good globalists now. They're not going to rock the boat. you know, half of their economy is export stuff to the Western world. They're not going to do shit about it. They're globalistic too. It's funny to me when I see people with like Marx avatars or, fucking hammer and sickles on their Twitter handles or something. When I see stuff like that and I see them praising China, China's going to keep the U.S. in line. Oh, how wrong you are. Oh, you have no idea how the world works. I see some people, it's like even people with libertarian leanings, they're like, praise globalism, the opposite's worse. No, it's not. Globalism is world authoritarianism. It has to be. It's inevitable because it further centralized systems that already were prone to centralized corruption. The less centrality, the better. The less bureaucracy, the better. Generally speaking, there's a bare minimum at which everything is as efficient as it can possibly be, after which adding any more laws, regulatory bullshit, or deals makes them less efficient, makes people in general poorer by concentrating wealth in fewer hands. When people say, well, late capitalism is why a handful of people have as much money as everybody else in the world. No. It's not late capitalism. They were only able to cause that to happen through the misapplication of patent law, regulatory structures, and tax codes, as well as various trade deals and government grants. The government gives free money to one group over another. When they're both in competition, you don't have a free market. When the government charges you rent, aka a property tax, to have the means of production at all, that's not a free market. When trade is restricted by all sorts of deals in which people in dark back rooms smoking cigars and eating caviar shake each other's hands and wink at each other while both holding daggers behind their backs, that's not free trade. It's not a capitalistic world. There's very little actual capitalism in it. The rudiments of capitalism that still remain behind in this world today is all that's keeping some of the countries in the world afloat. People keep talking about like Somalia is the perfect paradise of libertarian capitalism. No, it's not. It's one of the most centralized of all, because if you do anything that the ruling military body in your tribal area tells you not to do, you get killed. Now, it's an extreme variant of totalitarianism. Give me that bullshit. No, but propagandists will try to blame Russia despite the fact that Russia, ultimately, is also just another cog in that globalist game. The difference is they are still occasionally willing to rock the boat because of their nuclear prowess. Therefore, they make a convenient scapegoat. The problem is, in the past, our fight against like the Soviet sphere kept us more free because, we had to contrast ourselves with the atheistic, authoritarian, very centralized system they had. So while we had a centralized military-industrial system, attempts were made to preserve the fabric of liberty generally, because otherwise there's no contrast. It's like it would make their argument for them. Oh, well, look, the Americans, they wave the red, white, and blue, but really they're just kind of like us. Only we actually want people to be equal, and they still got like civil rights violations and stuff. It would have given them the advantage. That's sort of what we're doing now. We've handed an advantage on a golden platter to the Russians, oddly enough, by blaming them constantly for problems that are actually caused not by the Kremlin, but by Washington, D.C. Or by people sitting there in Mexico City. Or by Justin Trudeau or the EU's authorities. No, these people are the ones that actually govern our countries. Why is it that the Russians are so able to intrude upon things? If you're so high-minded and wonderful, and you have all these wonderful toys of military capability and diplomacy, and we're so wonderful and free and everything's hunky-dory and they're evil, why is it that they keep winning then? Why are you worried about them moving from country to country? Look, this is the third time in recent history that a burgeoning sort of political shift has been blamed on Russia. They did it in France too. Remember, right before their election, when they were worried that Le Pen might crack out of the 30s into the 40s and make macaroni there look really, really weak. When that was happening, what did they do? Oh, be careful, French people. Russia might try to put out false news. They might try to use Twitter bots, Facebook shitposting army brigades and stuff. Remember that? Yeah, a lot of people don't. And they won't remember this either, because unless somebody's cued into current events and they understand that propaganda is innate within news, it's not just U.S. news. The Russian press does the same fucking shit too. Trust me. Unless they understand that, they probably don't even pay any attention to this. They don't give it any importance. They'll just passively absorb it and say, yo, the Russians are trying to overthrow the Mexican government too. They want to put a pawn in power there. No, they don't. It's not because they know better. They know better than to think it'll happen. The establishment of Mexico is basically a mafia state tied in with the cartels. It ties in with neoliberals here. Why do you think that Obama was so willing to give them automatic weapons? Oh, hey, here's Sinaloa. Have some machine guns. Because you're more willing to work with us than the other cartels. That's what it boils down to. It lowers the price of the drugs that they're bringing in so they can keep up their fucking drug war. It's not even a conspiracy. It's pure economics. It's commerce. You'd do that too if you'd created a black market. You'd still want money out of it. You don't want to just let that money be libertarian and free and just have a totally suppressed system. No, you want the heads of that production to still work with you a little bit, pay you a bribe, and do some heavy lifting for you once in a while. Hey, you scratched my back several times. Oh, this other cartel is not playing by the rules. Don't worry, we'll take it. We'll make sure that some heads roll in the most literal fashion, and that's ultimately what happens. This has nothing to do with Russia. This has to do with a weak Mexican establishment, which is grating on its population, because for years and years, we're going to do something about the cartels. The economy will get better, and nothing gets better. There's a problem. Why do you think people flee the country? There's a reason for that. Why would they want to flee? They're still coming to the United States despite the constant threat at this point of actually being deported, actually being, even potentially dying and doing the border crossing itself. So, I think that things must be pretty desperate in some of the communities of Mexico. Mexican government's worried, so they have like the fucking Washington Post. Through their DNC allies, they'll have them put out a couple pieces. Oh, the Russians are trying to usurp our wonderful country, that millions of people have fled from, but it's great. So vote for the establishment. We'll keep doing the same stupid stuff we've been doing for decades. Nothing will change, but at least we won't be controlled by Russia. No, we'll be controlled by the Democrats. That's about all. Peace out.